Good afternoon and welcome to the last day of the SEEDIG for our first online virtual summit, let's say. Thank you for being here. My name is Veronica Ștefan and I will be the co-moderator today. On behalf of the SEEDIG, we have prepared what we hope a very nice, exciting topic for today, and that would be artificial intelligence in the South and Eastern Europe. So what is the readiness for AI? But then, of course, AI, it's a big topic, so we plan to discuss it from different angles. Today with me as co-moderator is Irina Buzu. Irina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Veronica, for giving me the floor. My name is Irina. I am a lawyer. I do intellectual property and tech law. I'm based in Moldova. And I'm very happy to see all of you today. And we hope that we have a really engaging and very exciting discussion. So let's rock this.
Thank you, Irina. Well, yeah, we really hope we can rock this together, and we can do that with the good presence that we hope we will have with your contributions as well. And a little bit of housekeeping before we start. For those of you that are in the Zoom room, please make sure that you have the full name mentioned, and wherever interesting, that you might even mention your affiliation if you consider that relevant. Also, start putting your questions in the chat room, but also on all the social media channels you are following this session. All questions are allowed, so no questions are forbidden. We don't have maybe all the answers, but we will for sure try to respond to all of them. And to introduce our two main guests for today, which do bring a lot of expertise. They represent two important organizations that we are looking up to whenever we speak about artificial intelligence and technologies, but also human rights. So that would be a nice mixture for today. The first on the list would be Mr. Yannick Meneceur. He's a French magistrate. He's seconded to the Council of Europe, one of our good partners for this event for the entire week. He's assigned as an advisor in the digital transformation, but he's also a lecturer at the University of Strasbourg. He's lecturing on cyber justice and digital economy, but he's also publishing a lot of articles and analysis on artificial intelligence, including his book a bit earlier today, this year, published. He might speak a bit more about that a bit later. And then the second guest, which represents a very, very big, important company in the era of digital technologies, and that would be Microsoft. And today with us is Dr. Matthias Sachs. He's the Director of Corporate Affairs for Microsoft in the Central and Eastern Europe. He will bring a bit of a flavor for both what Microsoft is doing on a global level, but also in the region. He came in the company in 2012. He has been working with the industry before that, so he has a lot of expertise, but also with public institutions. He's a graduate of political sciences, so I'm really happy to have him on board. With this in mind, I will start with the very first, let's say, easy question for now, and that goes to both our speakers. How is your work related to AI? And if I may ask, is it AI a reality or a myth at this point? Dr. Sachs, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to a vivid discussion the next 60 minutes. So that's great. I'm excited. On that question, I think it's absolutely not a myth. It is a reality. It's everywhere already. It is still unknown to many people. It is still exciting to many. Many are still anxious about it, for sure, at the same time. No, but it's absolutely here. And we could talk about technical details, and I think you can't find any sector or even any part of society where you don't see artificial intelligence already at work, really. Everything then based on the cloud, which is not that old as such as well, but AI is absolutely a reality. And my work is very much related to AI, since I'm the corporate spokesperson here in the CE region for Microsoft, and mainly dealing with the governments and all the influencers working around governments in the political bubble, let's say, in various capitals, as well as going above and beyond that within the respective societies in CE. And since AI is everywhere and it's used, it's deployed, it gets developed, and it's actually a lot of future lies within this new technique. And let's say that the road is bright and big ahead of us. People have a need to talk about that. And since the company I'm representing here is developing AI on large scale, from A to Z, really, all the aspects, we are a front runner on that technology in many regards, together with our thousands and thousands of partners globally. People come to me and ask many questions about that. And when we have to, let's say, think about how we want to deploy this correctly, and we want to regulate that eventually, and I think that's what we're going to discuss here in the next 60 minutes, people turn to someone like me to kind of bridge the gap between the corporate world and what would be needed for policies and regulation. So I'm very much into this in my day job. Yeah.
We imagine. Well, you are not here by accident. You are the voices that we are looking to hear always. Mr. Meneceur, how is this looking from your perspective, myth or reality? How is it all connected? And I'm referring here both to your work within the Council of Europe and outside of that, because obviously it's very rich outside as well.
Yes, thanks a lot first for inviting Council of Europe. Indeed, the Council of Europe was very active for this SEEDIG, and it's very important to share our principles, values that I think told to everybody. So very quickly, to answer to your question, I think this is a mix of myth and reality. Sorry, Matthias, just my point of view. This is clearly a reality, as you mentioned. In our daily life, in our smartphone, we already have this kind of technology. But what is a myth is some persons interpret the capabilities of artificial intelligence, meaning you have this kind of thinking that general artificial intelligence, meaning something which is totally comparable to our human brain, will be maybe for tomorrow. And I think that maybe one day it will appear, but at the state of the art, what we have is algorithmic systems, meaning statistical machines that could make really incredible application. But on the other hand, there is some concern in public opinion about the use of that. And I think what we have to tackle with is first demystifying artificial intelligence, meaning explain to citizen, people, user, that what they have in their hand, in fact, and what are the real capabilities. And to conclude about that, because I want to be short and give floor to question and exchange, I think that there is, again, huge possibilities for facial recognition and huge issues for that. This is a very precise algorithm. But on the other hand, you have some myth. And I can dig a little bit with that if you wish, about use of artificial intelligence in the justice field, for instance. This kind of predictive algorithm that could forecast a court decision. I think we have really to take care with some application. And it's why the Council of Europe is currently working on that. We want to regulate clearly artificial intelligence. The positive news, and we will discuss about that with Matthias, is that we believe that sometimes that big tech companies are against regulation is totally false. When we discuss with Microsoft, we have very concrete discussion about that. So we have also to go ahead. And in the same time, we must find a good way to regulate that, to do not slow down some kind of innovation and public benefits.
I think then there is the moment to start one by one, because we have on the one hand the more practical, say, approach to artificial intelligence, and that would be the deployment. So what are the practical uses of AI? You know, if it is a reality, where is it happening, where it should happen? Either it's both in the public or private sector. And then maybe we can go back into the why we need to regulate and how maybe. And I will particularly look on the deployment, because even if we are in the CE context, so it includes countries of the Council of Europe, EU as well. The European Commission launched, I think, a couple of days ago, a report on the digital transformation and the particular microeconomic dimension. And they were even mentioning, and by the way, AI is everywhere. Either you call it AI or big data or IoT or cloud or smart cities, it's basically all going back to some sort of algorithm or more advanced forms or models of machine learning. So it doesn't really matter. It's all under the AI. We're not going to so much depth definitions of what is AI, but everything is touching a little bit. And the report that I'm mentioning, I will be also including in the Zoom chat as a link, is particularly highlighting the added value that is supposed to bring, right, the AI. And more or less, they estimate that by 2030, 2.2 trillion additional contributions to the GDP will be brought in the entire year. But then it's also interesting there that they say in order to have this net outcome by 2030, there should be also investments. And on the one hand, they highlight the importance of investments in the ICT infrastructure, and that should be like each year about 75 billion euros, but also in skills, and that would go about 42 billion euros each year. So what would be the deployment part? Where do we see it? You can give examples from all sectors, all industries. The more we bring it, the better it is, so everyone has a clear image. I would start with, again, with Dr. Sachs and then continue with Dr. Meneceur.
Sure, thanks. So I would, thanks for that summary. I think you put it quite well. I would take a step back before talking about AI in specific and talk about digital transformation, which is actually front and center. And I think the European Commission put that well, and Ms. von der Leyen put that well as well. So that's the piece here. That's what we talk about. And if you look at what national governments are doing, and specifically in CEE, they're all eager to start and to steer and to foster their respective national digital transformation journey in close collaboration with the European Union. And now we have a lot of funding available in that time of crisis, and a lot of that funding should go into digital transformation. And we are working with various governments to help them, and not only on our own benefit, but for the benefit of our local partners and other players in the ICT industry, to tap into this funding and to steer digital transformation as the baseline, as the 360 principle here, where AI is, of course, playing a critical role. And when we talk about digital transformation, we have to talk about the backbone of all of that, which is cloud computing. And cloud computing is the backbone for any AI deployment. And again, looking at CE or the SEE region, we see many governments still struggle with the concept of public cloud. We have seen that in being embraced by the UK government, by the French government in parts. The German government is a little bit more reluctant here. And then we have a digital sovereignty discussion heating up currently very much between France and Germany in particular. But the idea of public cloud has not yet landed fully in the CE region, but is kind of dreamed in many heads over there, I think. And many people got the sense that we have to get the cloud computing piece right and all the components that stick to that. And then we can talk about AI, because AI is born in the cloud very much. And you need to deploy that. And then you can steer digital transformation. And then you can talk about juicy AI applications, which really help transform society. And one thing I want to call out, and I will come back to that, I think, in the course of the discussion, is that especially in CE, we have a huge pool of young, talented, well-educated people, and many, many great developers and many, many great startups. That is an asset. That's really a USP for many CE markets compared to the mature markets in Western Europe, or to countries like the US, Canada, Australia, Japan. Like this young, well-educated population. And if these folks can help steer the digital transformation of their respective societies by building AI applications that live and breathe in the cloud, that could be really something here. I stop here, could go further, but for the moment, I'd stop here.
Sure. Dr. Meneceur?
Yes, I agree with you with your very good analysis of this report of European Commission. Now, digital transformation is everywhere, meaning it seems key to economic growth, and it is key. Keep in mind that with health crisis, we will face for sure an economic crisis too. And I think for policymakers, investing in digital now is key to sustain development first. And the other thing, the conversation we have is thanks to technology, meaning we can keep contact, thinking, discussion. So there is a very positive aspect. On the other hand, and as you know, Council of Europe is working on human rights, rule of law, and democracy. We believe that, of course, economic growth is important. But what we believe also is that our key principles are also important. Because if you want economic growth, you must have a proper legal regime first to ensure security of citizens and to ensure a perfect word, trust. Trust. You cannot decide like this that people should trust technology. They will only trust technology if they see that they can do that. And we must prove that. It's why when you say that now technology is everywhere, another provocative question could be, is there a digital solution to everything? And maybe we can invest also that question. Because when I will discuss maybe a little bit of justice afterwards, but this concrete example, you know, we try to find a solution to the caseload in courts. And for sure, there is maybe ways to improve the process of case in courts. But this is not always a technical solution. This is almost a human organization that could be first assessed. So just to conclude, I think that, of course, technology is everywhere. Digital transformation is key to our society. We have a new socio-technical environment for sure, but we have to ask a question, and it worries me a lot. What kind of transformation do we want? This digital transformation, of course, is now a reality for us. But sometimes I have the feeling that we lack of a democratic debate to understand exactly where we want to go. And again, I think we have huge possibilities with technology, but if we misuse this technology, we will have a lack of trust, and maybe we will lose good opportunities.
Yes, please, Dr. Sachs.
Yeah, thanks. Yannick, I couldn't agree more. I think that is spot on. And we have to have that public debate. And that's very much the heart of my role here at Microsoft, to foster such public debates. And that's why I'm here today. So talk about the responsible approach to AI, the ethical principles that are underlying these things. And I think, and that's, I'm a proud European in that respect, since I think the Commission is really playing first row here compared to other players globally, public sector players, governments, institutions, and the like. We have a chance here at Europe to really spearhead the debate on these topics. And that's why Microsoft, as you indicated in your first remarks at the beginning of this conversation, is super happy to contribute to that, and really very much looking forward to what the high-level expert group at the European Commission level is doing about this, and what other players, how all these EU players interact and combine their forces and foster public debates, because we have to have that. I could go into detail here what we think about what responsible AI should look like, talking about our ethical principles. We have those. This is super important, and we think hard before deploying anything. And we really challenge our developers. We challenge the developers we're working with very much based on such principles. And we could have, let's say, a separate debate stream on that ethical piece here, but it is front and center. And we have to, you're right. So let's roll one step back here and talk about that before we talk about economic opportunities, which is exciting, and they're there. And I think we agree on that one, but we got to get our responsibility piece here right before that. Agree.
Sorry for me to intervene. So before we move on to actual regulation, we have a very provocative question in the chat here from one of the participants, who is basically asking, how do we measure AI progress, considering the fact that we have a lot of AI startups and patent applications that come from outside the EU? And so there is this common conception that the European Union or the region is sort of lagging behind in AI regulation, measurement, progress, and so on. So they're asking, what's the main challenge to Europe in this process? What do you think?
One initial comment from my end here. I think, as I just said, I think we're not lagging behind on regulation. I mean, regulation is a new field. There's not a lot of AI regulation yet. Policymakers and lawmakers are thinking intensively about this. And I think Europe is really a front runner, even though there's not much certainty yet. So that is a good thing. The downside could be that, of course, if you think about GDPR or the NIS directive in privacy and security, in the privacy and security field, this is regulation that is somehow well respected, but some others would say that's too restrictive. And in the US, many folks don't like the GDPR. And on Capitol Hill, they don't really love that piece of regulation. They say we can do more without such a piece of regulation. And they can have that in California, but we're not applying that on the federal level because it's hindering economic growth. And that might be a problem, but I would say we should be proud of that. And if it takes a little bit longer, it's a little bit more complicated here in Europe. It is more thorough. It's more stable, it's more reliable, it's more sustainable, ultimately. And I have to say that as an industry representative here, that I'm a fan of very thorough and neat European regulation, even though it might look like in the first place once in a while as hindering certain innovations and stopping certain things. But we have to get that right. And I think we're quite good at that in Europe.
Thank you so much. I think there is a lot of consensus on that in Europe we need quite thorough regulation. And to follow up on that specific topic, I have more of a question of my own. What would you say is the best way to tackle the challenge here when trying to find a balance between innovation that is necessary and regulation that protects the rights and freedoms?
Yeah, if I may, Matthias, I will take that question. This is a very usual question where we think that innovation is opposed to regulation. It's false, totally false in my opinion, because regulation can support innovation and in a proper way, this way of trust that I mentioned. Because if you have an innovation without any boundaries, it's a jungle. You know, and I cannot believe that there is an invisible hand on the market that will able to balance that. So it's why we need a proper regulation, like I mentioned, that is very strong on its pillar on human rights, rule of law, again, democracy. I think this is very important. And the other hand, we must be able to apply that in a proper way where we do not first hinder innovation. And I think also about small and medium companies in digital, you know, the weight on their shoulder with regulation could be very, very heavy. So we must help them to understand and apply this regulation. So again, the key question, and I will conclude with that, is why some operators do not want regulation. This is important. And take care that this kind of argument is just reveals, in my opinion, a private agenda. But I stop that.
Thank you so much for the comments, Mr. Meneceur. Mr. Sachs, would you like to follow up on this as well?
I would actually like to follow up on a question I just saw in the chat. So about educating decision makers on the notion of AI and its application. I think this is front and center. We have to do that. And in many places we see a lack of knowledge. That is true. And we have to change that. And you might think of, you want to do that top down or bottom up, and bottom up is maybe what we are doing here today. And I think you would need both. So you would need to talk to the C-suite in any government. And as Microsoft, we are trying to do that, meet with ministers, prime ministers, or engage in one-to-few conversations on the working level, even in certain ministries, and help them to understand that. And not about our products, but about the technology as such, right? Together with others, together with local partners, especially who have certain knowledge, who apply things, who are contributing to national economies and helping really to create jobs and educate people again to have additional jobs on top of that. So that's an important piece here. And for policymakers, you have to make clear why this is beneficial for their respective country. What's the benefit for their people? What's the benefit for this economy, let's say? So that is super interesting. And here in the second part of the question, there's also a great one. Contemplate on possible mechanism for control of trustworthy and ethical AI. That is front and center. And at Microsoft, we have 6 principles developed here. And I think they resonate very much with what the high-level expert group at the Commission level said as well, which is it must be fair, it must be reliable and safe, it must be private and secure, it must be inclusive. And then we have 2 underlying principles which would cut across these 4 mentioned aspects, which is accountability and transparency. And I could go into detail and talk about those, but such principles are needed. And that is a start. And as I said, legal regulatory debates are at early stages. And we have to think about the right approach here. And we would say we want to start with a governance-based approach as Microsoft, to not be too rigid, too prescriptive in the very beginning, but to have a governance model really. And this might come from such a principled approach here, as I described, to get to a point where people start trusting that because it is trustworthy and you have a certain legal certainty in the end. You have boundaries left and right, as we are used from the GDPR or the NIS directive in the fields of privacy and security.
Yeah, Matthias, if I could just react, because I totally agree with you, Matthias. You just steal my conclusion, but it's not a problem. Education is key, meaning we must construct bridges. I'm very enthusiastic at the idea to go, and it's what I do in University of Strasbourg here, to meet engineers, you know, and discuss with them about law, and conversely to young students that have some concepts about artificial intelligence, to explain them exactly what is artificial intelligence. we can create all regulations that we want. If we don't have a proper education for enlightened citizen, I think it's, that it's worthless.
Thank you so much to both of you. I think most people would agree that, as you have said before, that education is a very important component in making people embrace AI and technology altogether, because here we see a lot of very big words such as transparency, protection, ethics, and so on, that overall might seem very clear to most people, but then when you try to ask the general public, what do you understand by this? Then you would usually find a very huge question mark in their faces and in their eyes, because they don't understand the concepts fully. So this would be great to see, for example, a partnership between the private sector and the regulatory bodies and the governments themselves to create education policies that would be very inclusive and very consumer friendly, so to say. I also see another comment that we have in the chat, kind of going back onto regulation and the progress of AI in the European Union and our region altogether. So someone's asking that if we don't have a huge player like a big tech company in the region, how can the EU strive for progress and for leadership in the AI?
Just a second, before going into the question, for which I would like to have an answer as well, because there is obviously this concern and it's floating in the air. It's also important to stress that while we do address right now the EU, it's not only the EU. I mean, we have many processes going around, even in terms of regulations. And I think there are many stakeholders that would like probably a global kind of regulation, if that's even possible to agree on, than regional or other more smaller parts of the regulation. So it's also good to look where it should happen, at which kind of institution, what kind of organization, and to which extent, what should be the limit of regulation. I mean, of course, I understand there are different kind of organizations present here, but what would be your stance on that as well? Anyone who wants to?
Yes, I start for that time and I let Matthias complete with his own view. I think indeed we need a global regulation for sure, because you already have national regulation, clearly, about hate speech, for instance. It's very interesting to see how Germany reacts about that, and the issues in France to create also a proper framework. And the result on a global point of view is quite poor, in my opinion, because when you have big operators that came from United States, but also other countries, of course, they apply the rule that they have to apply. But if you have a kind of patchwork, it's very difficult to raise, in my opinion, the global level of protection. It's why global players, global regulators, such as United Nations, OECD, UNESCO, in Europe, in fact, in the European Union at least, you have all these players that work on that. And the added value in at Council of Europe about that is that first, with our 47 member states, we plan now to work on a global legal framework on artificial intelligence for the 47 member states. So it's very important, in my opinion, to underline now with you all that we have 47 member states, from Portugal, Iceland, to Russia, Azerbaijan, etc., this wide Europe that wants to create a proper legal framework, not to hinder innovation. Again, it's not that. It's just to be sure that this innovation will go in a proper way to not create damages on the individuals and damages on the world society also. And I will conclude with that aspect. You know, when we are talking about regulation, and at least in Council of Europe, we focus mostly on individuals. The European Convention on Human Rights is clearly focused on individuals. But what is new now, when you see some scandals like Cambridge Analytica, you have now in mind that you can have very small damages on individuals. But if you take that as a global, in a global point of view, we have to find a good answer for that. So the positive thing, and I will conclude with that, is that we have very good contacts with big tech, really. When I say that, we have a very fruitful discussion. I can mention here the partnership with digital companies that we have at Council of Europe. Microsoft is on board, but I should quote also Facebook, Google, and we also have the small and medium companies that are on board. And sometimes we do not agree on everything, clearly, and it's obvious. But what is very important is that I heard a lot of interest from this company to do not create too much damages. They want to operate, they are not philanthropic for sure, but they care about person. And for me, this is a way where we can find progress together.
Yeah, thanks, Yannick. Let me add to that, and I would like to add to the international organizations you mentioned as a starting point. I think the United Nations, OECD, World Economic Forum, the European Union, these are the organizations where such a dialogue should start and is starting right now. We are having that dialogue as a global player, and I think others are having that too. And I think smaller players should totally contribute to that as well. So it should be as public and as inclusive as possible. And then maybe to add a more technical component here, where we want to, so how to start this whole thing, right? I think we know where we want to get with that, and to have some regulation, some certainty, and some broader understanding. But from a technical perspective, if we think about standardization, international norms, that is something which is not new to tech at all. We have always been advocating for global standards and norms in cyber, when it comes to what norms should apply, how you build a phone. Like from tiny details up to the higher principles. If we would start there at a more technical level, that would be, I think, helpful here when it comes to AI. But think about standards and norms. And at the same time, we have to be aware that there are cultural aspects, especially in the AI field, when it comes to ethical questions, which are perceived very differently in different parts of the world. And we have a European perspective. And there's even this east part of Europe that might see things different than the western part of Europe. And that is nothing compared to what we have between China and the US. And if you think about what is developed over there and what kind of regimes they apply over there, they are pretty much different than what we as Europeans and the Americans would think for many things. And if you approach this from a standard and a norm perspective in the first place, you might have a chance to overcome such barriers a bit in the beginning, at least. And then you will hit them again during the process, but you have to start somewhere. And again, to avoid to clash too soon, it is great if the United Nations put these things into their development goals and other pieces they have and they put forward publicly to start this dialogue. And we are engaged in all these markets. We are engaged with the Chinese government as well, even though we are, let's say, a Western-based company. We think there are sensitivities, and we have to be aware of that and have to address them. And find, let's say, bodies that are capable of addressing those. And again, this is high level. This sounds generic to many people, but it's early days. Please keep that in mind.
It's good to keep this in mind as well. I mean, it is early days. It's becoming old and new in the same time. Old for those that have been part of the debate, and new for many other players that are still not at the table. I think it's a good time to look a little bit in the sea. And while I'll also let you give your input on that, I'll also share a little bit all many frameworks that exist, because there are more than 300 at this point, different recommendations, sets of principles, and so on and so forth. And the Council of Europe did very good in putting it in a visual tool. So I will share it for the public as well. But then we can also keep on debating on what can be done, or how can we make sure that the region is a bit better and active, let's say, on this topic as well. Do you think we can do that as well?
Yes, if I may start about that, because thanks a lot to broadcast this data visualization that we have done at Council of Europe. We discover that with all these principles, that it could be very misleading first. What I mean is that when you talk about transparency, for instance, you, in fact, do not have the same agenda behind that word if you are a company, if you are a policymaker, if you are a citizen, you know. So it's very easy to say that we are transparent, we need explainability or whatever. The most important thing is to be sure that we use first the same word with exactly the same concepts behind. So the first finding of this work we have done in Council of Europe, and I want here to highlight also some other meta-analysis, such as ETH Zurich, that have realized a very good analysis of all this framework, is that these ethical frameworks are important. It's a very good start, but clearly we have to take care of ethics washing, meaning claiming that we are doing very well with some very nice principles, but how you enforce that. This is, for me, something very important because, and Matthias will react maybe about Microsoft, but I saw that in Microsoft, you try to come from principle to practice. And I think this is something that is very important. And for me, as a regulator, when you have such a start, you can then imagine that if a company or whatever, any entrepreneur prove that he has taken some important steps to prevent damages, as a judge, for me, it's a very positive signal. You have things that you can forecast. There is things that you cannot forecast. And if you're doing things in bad way, meaning you just deploy artificial intelligence just to make money and you don't care about the effects, for me, there is no issue to have a sanction about that. But on the other hand, you must create a proper policy framework about that. And meaning we are working, for instance, with IEEE. They are working on standards like Matthias highlights. For me, it's very interesting to see that you can have ex-ante mechanism that could be more or less at the end of the operator, things about GDPR. And you could have, for instance, human rights impact assessment. We already have privacy impact assessment. It could be interesting, in my point of view, to enhance a little bit, to prevent discrimination, to prevent, for instance, again, for justice. We can discuss, I hope, a little bit about that later. You can have some kind of very precise analysis. And then, of course, you must have, in my opinion, sanctions if things goes wrong. Why? Because if you want to create trust, again, you must prove that if you have bad behavior, that there is sanction.
Yeah, thanks, Yannick. I may add to that. You correctly said that we want to go from thinking about policies and principles to practice, to regulation. And I think it would help to slice into pieces what we are talking about here. What is AI? So AI is the use of data. And then we see what regulation we have already regulating the use and the transfer and the storage of data, which is many pieces are already there. So we don't need to start from scratch. Like handling of data, processing of data, and transferring of data, that is handled in Europe at least by the GDPR, and it's protected in many respects by the NIS directive, for instance. And if you then slice it more into pieces, you can think about the differences. And I think we kind of tapped into this already. Developers, deployers, what are the different liabilities here on both sides? And then I said, we would like to have a governance-based approach. And as Yannick said, risk assessments. We need to have risk assessments for the bits and pieces happening here to be very precise, to generate the most transparency we can generate, and have then accountability for what is happening here. So you would think a big corporation like ours is like not showing the algorithms we use for our products. But in this case, we have to be as much transparent as we can be and share as much as possible, really, to be very precise on who's responsible, which actor is in scope. When we want to go with a governance-based approach, we have to be transparent, because otherwise they would say, okay, you need to be more prescriptive. We need to have more very specific legislation in place because governance is just not working because you guys are not sharing enough. You're not like living openly up to your principles. We just have to trust you. And the trust piece is front and center here. So be transparent, try to be accountable as a big player, and try to be governance-based in the first place, working towards a more specific regulation later on.
Thank you all for the inputs. I would like to go back to the C part, and I'm asking that because, you know, here we are discussing about the importance of regulation, but I think players in the region and even in our audience here from the questions we have, I think they would be more interested to know that the stakeholders, even the national governments, actually have a stronger engagement with AI technology, and that is they would actually use them. And that's why they're probably even pressing a little bit on this literacy part, on educating stakeholders. So you see, it's not just, they are not concerned that people will lose jobs necessarily, even though probably that's also part of their concerns, but that actually stakeholders are not discussing or even understanding this technology. And thank you, Tony, for mentioning the University of Helsinki's course on elements of AI. It's a very good tool for those that don't know it yet. Go there and start learning about it. So what should we do? What should we do to create this momentum, or better say, how could we explain to them that this is coming and it's important for them to get involved?
If I may start about that, of course, it's important to use technology. Of course, you could have the feeling that you are lagging behind because you don't have the latest technological tool. But I come back to what I stated before. Everything has not a technological solution, really. So I think for policymakers, it's very important to understand where AI or any digital technology could have an added value. Why? The risk is to decredibilize all this technology. Because if you deploy a technology that is useless, then you prove and you may put in mind of person that the whole technology is useless. So if just following a trend, for me, there is a huge danger with that, really. I will take a very concrete example for you all. You know, this contact tracing application. I don't want to open the debate here, but you see how trendy it was in the period where policymakers want to have their own contact tracing application in each country. In France, at least, the findings of the use of application is very poor. You know, very few persons download the application, and even yesterday, the Prime Minister of France said that he does not install the application on his own phone, you know? So how can you explain to citizens that technology could be good if you don't use yourself technology because you do not understand or you do not use the proper tools? To conclude in a nutshell about that, my example is just to show that this COVID application cannot work, in my opinion, because Bluetooth technology does not fit to that need. It's as simple as that. So finding a solution that is mainly public health, that is wearing mask, having gel for hands, we have concrete solution then, and this is discipline of persons. If you use a technology as a magic wand, it won't work. Conversely, you could have for some public application, very good use of technology. And I will give an example for education. Again, in France, we have a tool that is a lot of debate. There is a lot of debate around that tool, but you have a kind of map for young students to find a way to find a proper curriculum and education course, you know, when you are a bachelor. So this map enhances all the possibilities of research. When you are in the poor suburbs of a city, you don't have access to this information. And for that particular case, thanks to technology, you can enhance the possibility. So I want to conclude like that. For policymakers, I think it's very important to be wise, of course, maybe to have an advisor or whatever, but also as a policymaker, to do not believe to people that there is a technological solution for everything.
Let me add my perspective here by briefly describing how I would have a government conversation, or how we are having those conversations as Microsoft. So the first thing is, and that is working level as up to the C-suite of the government, meeting the prime minister or ministers, is that we would listen and say, hey, what are your problems? What do you see as the biggest challenges or the biggest opportunities for your market? Because I'm not going there and telling them about those, but I'm there to listen and understand that. First thing, and then I hear that, and then I can process this, or we process that compared to the best practices we see in other parts of the world. We can bring that let's say, the footprint of the global players saying, hey, this works in Peru, this works in Australia, this works in Armenia, and this works in Czech Republic, and this is Denmark. So maybe you want to think about such scenarios. What is really helpful here with respect to what you just told me are your challenges and opportunities. And then we take it from there. So we offer our global expertise, our network of partners, our information here to understand potential scenarios, because it's about scenarios. It's not about products and services, it's about scenarios and how you can ramp up digital transformation at large scale and from a bigger perspective. And that is especially important if you convince some C-level stakeholders in the government. Things can move rather fast. And I have seen that in smaller markets where people in the government are really the core influencers and can really make decisions quickly and pass that downwards within their bodies. Things can move quickly. And if you get that understanding right, and that is not only a Microsoft, that could be in an industry alliance, ideally, to show up with other international players, ideally a local player, ideally some European partners, partnering with telecommunication agencies, for instance, or even with authorities to go there and say, hey, we have a message to tell, with American Chambers of Commerce, with other associations, academia, third party, to make that pitch, to enlighten them on the possibilities here. That is super important. And we are having these conversations, and that is way beyond any sales conversation. It's about thinking about scenarios and what can be done for a country, for a society, and how we can contribute there with our global expertise.
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure we'll provide just an answer, and it's not the point to find just one answer to the problems, but it's also probably important to reflect on the differences or the different levels of involvement between the different stakeholders, different regions. At the end of the day, if you look on all prognosis on what AI benefits will bring, especially to the economic side, you see these huge discrepancies between China, US, a part of Western Europe, and then Southeast Europe, the rest of the world. So it's like the contribution, but also the benefits are really small. So discussing about this as early on, even probably before reaching an agreement on any regulation would be even more relevant, because engaging, and probably this is the important part of how to engage citizens, but also decision makers at the same time. And I liked at some point in one of the papers Mr. Meneceur has written, actually, and I read it translated quite recently. He was mentioning in all this connection with all the AI debates, the practical result is that any serious examination of the capabilities of this technology is left to expert controversy, making its content totally inaccessible to laymen, to citizens. And I think this is the essence and everything. We discuss a lot about this technology, but then probably people still don't get the very practical implications. And I would go back to that if you agree with. So we can discuss some practical examples. How is AI deployed? Mr. Meneceur reflected on the judicial court. How is it used? Because all these needs of regulations in a, let's say, in a region that is not deploying it so much local or national level, it might be even hard to understand. We don't deploy it. I'm pretty sure in most of the outside the EU countries, at least, we don't deploy AI in any predictive systems, or at least it's not transparent for us to know that yet. So if it's happening, we don't know if it's actually happening. Can you give us more insights into that? On or also any other use cases of how AI can be used, or it is currently deployed? Very
yes.
fast.
Yes, thanks a lot for that, because as you understand, I want to mention the use of artificial intelligence, because it's a very interesting use case, in my opinion, and I will be very short. When during my function in Council of Europe, I go to some courts, such as Albania, Kosovo. I visit some courts like that, and there is a huge basic problem that is just case management, meaning instead of having just a book where you write the number of a case as the content of the case, you just need a proper IT system just to fight the case properly. This is just the basics, and I think you really need that. But in the same time, of course, colleagues in court hear that what happens in other regions, and what happens, for instance, in United States, United Kingdom, or France, and they say, oh, there is some incredible use of digital technology, and we see that artificial intelligence could forecast our court decision, but it will replace the judge. Imagine the danger. This is the kind of question that I have. And in fact, the first thing, to take a concrete use case, meaning the prediction of court decision, if you dig a little bit, you see that, in my opinion, this is far to be mature for plenty of reasons. So policymakers should really take care of deployment of artificial intelligence solution in that respect. If they think that they could solve the caseload in courts with that, it's totally false, in my opinion. Why? Because predicting a court case is very complex, because when you try to train a machine with case law, this is mainly how it works. You do not find in case law, in my opinion, enough element to have all the causality, meaning all the reasoning, legal reasoning of a judge. So you try to create a kind of fake understanding of the outcome. And of course, you have a very nice algorithm and you put inputs, you will have outputs. But it shapes the debate in a way of statistic could shape the debate. It's limited to the training of this case law. So to conclude with that, and this is a very important thing, you must assess this decision for some critical application. I do not say that Spotify or any other application of artificial intelligence in other way do not have impact. But when you have impact on citizens, on their right, or social impact or economic impact, that is very important. It's where regulation, in my important, is very, very important. The objective of Council of Europe is not to regulate everything. I think it's worthless and it's not effective at all. But we should focus on the application where we have more risk. And again, in judicial and for court management, I think, and in judiciary in general, this is a topic where we must be very, very careful, because you can create a lot of damages. And in fact, it's how can I say that, you challenge rule of law, in fact. And I think we have to keep that in mind. What is important? A calculation made by an algorithm or the law itself, you know? In what kind of world do we want to live? This is a very important question, and their technology doesn't have the answer.
Thank you so much. Following up on the comment that we need to think about what kind of world we want to live in. We at the youth school from SEEDIG just last week had a debate with a hands-on experience, basically covering everything that we've spoken up until now, because we were debating whether facial recognition technology should be used, whether it is beneficial versus all the risks that it poses. So it was very interesting to sort of see today in our discussions that we kind of tackled all those components that include educating the public, explaining everything, the policy making process, the balance between private interest of the private sector and the commercial interest of the private sector versus the public interest and the safeties and security nets that have to be put in place. So just like to launch an open debate for maybe another time, what is the ideal balance, again, between the private interest and the public interest overall, the public order, the public benefits that AI could bring into our lives?
This is a great question and a very big question, actually. And I think there's no right or wrong answer here. I would start from the principle of democracy. So we have elected governments, and they should decide on behalf of the citizens who elected them with a majority to form a government coming out of a parliament. And we need to talk to these folks as industry and help them to do their job. And that's how it works. And it's surely not the private sector. We can tell people what we have and what we think how that should be handled. And we are really careful, and we have a responsibility here, and we want to do things right. But we're not the decision makers what is good for society or for human beings. That's on policymakers and lawmakers.
I totally agree with you, Matthias, because it's the role of states to ensure, this is a positive obligation of states to ensure protection of citizens. So at this question, at the balance between private sector and public sector, this is at intergovernmental level, I think, where we should be more, how can I say that? We should create more proper regulation, not again regulation to regulate everything. It's not what I have in mind, but we must set concrete rules to protect citizens. Because on the other hand, you know, for a private company, and no offense, Matthias, about that, but private company have their own interest. It's not public interest, you know. Of course, I said just before that they take care of people, and I meet some individuals in all this company that people that really take care of what they do. But at a global level, when you take the world mechanism, it's mainly making money. And it's not a problem for me. It's life like we are in a neoliberal world like that. So this is the reality. But this is to the state to ensure proper boundaries for that, where you can ensure balance between interests. Keep in mind, what is democracy? Is how to coordinate needs that are sometimes opposite, you know? It's just to find the balance all that. And it's why Council of Europe is so much engaged in that regulation of AI. We do not want to, again, send a wrong message, meaning AI is a bad thing, that technology is against human rights. It's not the point. The point is to clearly understand exactly what we are talking about when we are talking about technology. As Veronica mentioned, it's not an expert debate, because everything become an opinion, you know. I saw so much debate where everybody say that, oh, there is that thing in the study, and the other, no, there is also that thing in the study. As a basic citizen, I'm not able to understand who is right or who is wrong. And again, we have to shape a debate, sorry to use again that word, enlightened debate, really. And it begins from the start. And again, and I will conclude with that, do not put in mind of person that progress is always purely technological. In 18th century, you know, you have these enlightened persons that raise human rights, and this is, for me, the main progress.
Thank you all. We are getting closer to an end. Our hour became quite short. And I will give you the floor as well, maybe for one last comment or one thing we should do, you know, after the session, and after that, I will have the floor. But I would like to mention something, and that SEEDIG is kind of this space of educating a little bit on this topic. We don't have a skills mission, but we do have maybe a literacy part of component, and many of our colleagues are doing many of the topics we have discussed here today, even in terms of COVID tracing apps. We have some recommendations for the stakeholders in the region. Our colleagues have been working on that in an intersectional project. We have the youth school where we train young professionals. We have these kind of spaces, which is basically a multi-stakeholder debate. And I do take this general idea coming over and over during this week, and that would be a difference that was made particularly in one of the days, and that was, we don't necessarily want digital workers, we want digital citizens. So we want people who understand how technology works. And I think there are a lot of recommendations and interest for that in this part. And with this idea in mind, what would be your final takeaways and the one thing we should do after this session closes? Dr. Sachs?
I really don't have a lot to add to your wonderful summary. I would say have more of that. Keep doing this great work. Keep pulling in folks like myself. Keep asking industry to show up and to justify and to explain and to participate. And of course, the joint work here of Yannick representing Council of Europe and myself representing a major player in public here with you facilitating such a dialogue, that's great. And we got to have more of that.
Dr. Meneceur?
Yeah, I totally agree with Matthias. Dialogue is essential. I think what we have to take care is not to create opposition between people. We have enough opposition like that. Again, big tech players have their agenda. Everybody has his own agenda, but if we forecast in what kind of world we want to live, we have to today and again tomorrow to invest more and more in democracy. This will be my final word.
Thank you so much. And before we even close it, Cezara Panait, our wonderful and patient rapporteur, what are the main messages that we take away from this session?
Thank you so much, Veronica. So I would like to wrap up this session by presenting the key points on CE's readiness on artificial intelligence, saying that there is already agreement from all the stakeholders, including the private sector, on the need to including the private sector, regulatory bodies, national governments, and international organizations on the need to develop a regulatory framework on AI. Then trustworthy and ethical AI principles would challenge the tech developers in the region to develop and deploy AI applications in line with ethical principles. Governments should foster and steer digital transformation as the baseline for any AI applications. And the balance between innovation that is needed for economic growth and regulation that would protect rights and freedom should be promoted, as innovation and regulation are complementary in achieving public trust in digital technologies. Furthermore, education and digital literacy needs to be the cornerstone of AI policy making. And it is important to understand that not every problem can be solved with technology, not even AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Cesara. Well, thank you all for this interesting debate, passionate even. So I hope we can continue in different other formats, hopefully next time in Moldova. Thank you to the entire SEEDIG team, to the Diplo Foundation for supporting all of us. And a big thank you to Irina. Irina, you have the floor for the very final word.
Yes, thank you so much. It's really been an adventure, today's discussion that we have. And I would like to thank the entire team who's been hands-on to make this experience happen, although unfortunately it's online, or maybe fortunately, we don't know. And thank you to our contributors who have given such amazing input on this completely controversial and amazing at the same time topic, because we've tried to cover everything under 1 hour, but people have been developing and talking about this for the past 5 to 6 decades. So there is never enough time to speak about AI and how to deploy it, how to regulate it, and how to understand it. So thank you so much.
Many thanks, everyone. From the org team side, we continue with a talk on digital health. If you want to join us, it will start in some 13 minutes in another room. We'll make sure to paste the link in chat. And many, many thanks to everyone for this amazing session. We very much enjoyed it.
Bye, everyone.